So my name's Crispin Wigfield. Currently I'm a consultant neurosurgeon. I work in Bristol, and at the time when I was doing my research and taking part as cohort 2, I was also had a dual role as a divisional clinical director, which is a sort of medical management role within the National Health Service. And just as a bit of background to that, my division, as it were, covered all of neurosciences, all of musculoskeletal sciences, a major trauma centre, a centre for enablement, which covered things like wheelchairs, communication aids. We had psychologists, so it's quite a diverse group of clinical practitioners. And then we worked in a hospital that had recently been built. So it was the last private finance initiative hospital signed off by the Labour government before it was actually constructed. It cost £430 million, and it was very shiny and very new, but it had had several adverse press events that really made people think that it was inadequate and not fit for purpose. And this is rather what it looked like, really. It's a very shiny building, but there were problems with car parking, there were issues about food and quality of that food. And then at some point, the Care Quality Commission came in, probably a few months after it opened, and rated the hospital as requiring improvement overall in a number of domains. And some departments were rated as being inadequate. And I breathed a sigh of relief as a clinical director, because none of my departments were rated as inadequate, but the emergency department was rated as inadequate, and that was a different division. That was medicine. That was nothing to do with me. But everyone still felt a sense of injustice and a bit aggrieved by this. And I thought it was quite useful to try and understand, well, what happens to people who work in an organisation when the organisation or department they work in has become stigmatized by the labels attached to it, rather than the individuals being stigmatized. But how do they feel and how do they react to it? And this is a sort of press headline that we got. So, hospital, no secret, Southmead Hospital, and the A&E rated, or the emergency department rated inadequate again. And the point is it's again. So in fact, they'd had a previous rating of being inadequate, and then the Care Quality Commission came back a few months later and put another label on them as being inadequate. And people were quite downhearted. But I really wanted to know, well, how do the staff react to that label? And in a particular group of staff would be the healthcare professionals. I might talk about them a little bit more. So that's members of professional bodies who've got recognised qualifications with Royal Colleges. And do they have a different perspective on it from people who work in the department but aren't members of a profession? So they might be receptionists or porters or other admin workers. So for people who aren't familiar with it, so the Care Quality Commission is a regulatory inspectory body in the UK, in England, and they produce a dashboard when they go in and inspect a hospital. And they have various domains like these, and these are all very important. And clearly things like safety is quite important, responsiveness, how fast people respond. And it's this urgent and emergency services that got these inadequate ratings. There's some bits that are very good, and overall as a trust we're quite good for caring. Now, in contrast to this sort of report, you might remember, if you're from the UK, Papworth Hospital, just down the road, recently got rated as outstanding in every single domain. And they feel pretty good, and then on the news and feeling good about themselves. So what happens if your department, represented here, the emergency department, is considered inadequate? And yet this has to react with all these other organisations. So we've got, if you can stop it spinning, the intensive care unit, the acute medicine units, the sustainability transformation partnerships, general practices, ambulance trusts, major trauma units, the Department of Health. There's all sorts of things going on there. And the emergency department's right at the heart of this and can't get away from it. And getting the impression from the people who worked in the department, particularly professionals, that they could either identify with the organisation, the hospital, or they could step over and identify with their institution, for example, their Royal College or the regulations from the General Medical Council as opposed to what the CQC might request. And I saw that there was some sort of dual identity, and that was a bit of a challenge to people. And it occurred to me this is something a little bit like the mathematical model of a Mobius strip, which some of you may remember from your maths. And if you don't, you take a strip of paper, and it's got clearly two sides to it. They're clearly separate, yeah? Anyone disagree with that? They're separate. It's two sides, white side, yellow side. And you take this strip, and you put, not like that, you put a twist on it. And you do that to it. My assistants here have provided me with props, and you suddenly have this structure, which still has clearly two sides to it. But if you follow one surface, it turns into the other. And it's an interesting entity, a Mobius, because it's got a certain tension in it. It wants to come apart. It's got no lines of symmetry. It's unbalanced. It's awkward. And perhaps that's what the dual identity or the conflict is with this Mobius model and healthcare professionals who perhaps have to answer to two bosses or have two different perspectives on things. So I try to represent it here in this illustration. So any one of these lines could be an individual or component in the healthcare system, and there's a dual identity that they have to go. And if you contrast that one with this picture here, so sometimes the blue is more prominent, sometimes the yellow, the orange is more prominent, sometimes the blue is outward looking, sometimes it's inward looking. And that was the essence of the challenge that people face when they're working with dual identities and slightly conflicted, ambiguous organisations. And this related really to the concept of some stigma and reputation. And I've now turned the organisation into this Mobius strip of red and green. And the little balls that you see, in a way, represent the individuals who work within the organisation, because they're either inward-looking or outward-looking. At some point in their process, they've got high reputation. At other points, they're working in a department that's stigmatised and challenged. And they're subject to lots of forces. This is a very complex slide, so you don't have to look at it in too much detail, but there are issues of legitimacy pushes you towards the green zone, a high reputation pushes you towards the green zone. This is where everybody wants to be. But if you lose legitimacy and you lose a reputation, you're down here. And that's what happens to your organisation is down here. And yet you might find yourself as an individual sucked into this thing that you can't escape from. So essentially from the research, I identified really that the healthcare professionals and all the people who worked in the department varied in their perceptions of injustice, wish for better identity, clarity of identity, and empowerment. But if you're a healthcare professional, a member of a Royal College, a professional nurse or doctor, you could leap, in and out of these zones to try and manage the stigma that was attached to your department. So you could say, well, my professional standards say I must treat people in order of priority of need, not in order of time that they arrive in the department. But at the same time, sometimes you could distance yourself from an organisation by revealing further negative elements of that organisation. So it makes you look good, and yet your organisation is being driven downwards even further through your own choice. Now, trying to get this information from people is difficult because I was a clinical director and I was looking at a department that had nothing to do with me, so I thought, but nobody really wanted to talk to me. I had a brief chat with that department's clinical director and they said, whoa, 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 beware, they will corral the wagons. And that's exactly what happened. So I got virtually no information directly from the staff groups I wanted to talk to. There were lots of emails about why they were too busy, how there was no stigma, how it didn't apply to them, how much was I going to pay them for the time involved, how was I going to backfill their role, could you come back and talk to us in the summer when it's a bit quieter. So I couldn't get anything very direct from them, and I had to collate various other sources of information. And something that was quite useful and rather unexpected was a review that emergency department put on. So a review is a light-hearted, humorous, theatrical event, and it can show these conflicting views. Some are funny, some may not be so funny, but it often juxtaposes paradoxes. It can reveal truths about situations that nobody really wants to talk about. And it's got quite a long history, the review. So in the 4th century BC, Aristophanes and Greek comedy and Greek humour showed things in a humorous light to point the finger at reality of what was going on socially and within society. And the review ended up being quite a rich source of information, revealing the views of the people who worked in the hospital at various hierarchies and at various ranks, as it were. So I think the point I wanted to make about the review is that you might find, when you're doing your research, a very unexpected source of data that you can explore and use, and might provide some interesting insights when you start to despair that no one is actually talking to you. And one element of the review really was taking themes of different departments, different workers within the emergency department, and setting it to ABBA music, ABBA tunes. So this was to the tune of Voulez-Vous, and it focused on the receptionists in the healthcare department, or the emergency department, but there were different songs to different themes. And one of the advantages of having a popular theme, like sort of ABBA hits, is that everyone knows the tune. So the audience gets on with it fairly quickly. They know the tune. They can sort of predict what's coming next. That's quite nice, because then they identify with that. And there's information from sort of within the department singing their own praises about how good they feel. And there was externally directed ridicule why everybody else was rubbish. So in a way, it was a bit like corralling the wagons, but also pointing out what else could be a problem elsewhere. And as a neurosurgeon, I didn't get away with it. So for those of you who can read, yes, the neurosurgeon tends to be in our ivory towers and not coming down to the emergency decision. So forgive the language, but you're nothing special. In fact, you're a bit of a knob. So I was being stigmatized as well, but I had to understand that. I won't sing it to you. So with the help of Michelle, and there's a poster outside, to very nicely put this together, this little infographic of what's going on. So the Care Quality Commission would come in and they would make a rating, so it needs improvement. Individuals might take that personally, and other individuals who might be members of professional bodies could step aside or leap onto different stepping stones to avoid being swept up in this river of stigma. And they could work in a very positive way or a negative way. And you think, well, why does this matter? Well, it sort of matters because it impacts on not just the reputation of the hospital, then impacts on staff retention, recruitment. People might, or patients might, avoid the hospital because it's a reputation even though they need its services. And it's very difficult when people have got staff choices of being able to work in different organisations. How do you attract them into your own organisation? So I think it does have implications for society, its care. I think people have to be careful about the message that is sent out and how it's received. And most importantly, I think there are unexpected truths hidden within organisations and institutions that we have to be cautious of navigating and negotiating. So that's it for now. Very happy to answer questions at the end and over lunch by the posters. Thank you.